Welcome back to another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Richard Thompson, and today I'm joined by John Buchanan, former Australian career coach and the mastermind behind one of the most dominant sporting teams in history. John led Australia through an era of unprecedented success, helping shape a culture that produced world records, World Cup victories, and some of the greatest players the game has ever seen. Whether you're leading a business, a team, or simply striving for excellence yourself, this conversation is for you. All right, let's get into it. John Buchanan, welcome to the show.
Yes, good to be here. Thanks, Richard.
You are like almost unequivocally classified or praised as the most successful test coach in history. How does that sit with you?
Well, it's nice the way you say it. I don't really think about it all that much, and even when I was coaching, I guess I didn't think about it all that much. It's nice to get those results, but they were really a product of a whole range of individuals and systems and processes and external people that were all hopefully pulling in the same direction to help us achieve those sorts of results.
Take me back. You were also an interesting candidate for the Australian team as a coach because you had never played at the test level, which up until that point I think was the first time that occurred. But you cut your teeth with the Queensland team. What did you learn in that experience? Because you had an incredible run of success before you stepped up to the national team when you were coaching Queensland. What can you remember in the early days in terms of coaching in that sort of that level?
I guess I often talk to leaders quite a bit about that these days. And in fact, I was just on a webinar yesterday with some emerging leaders, and I left them with the thought of, if there was one thing that they should take away from the time I had with them, and that was if I asked each of them, could they tell me in 30 seconds or less what their coaching philosophy or leadership philosophy was, then I think that sets them up. It's a good foundation. And so when I took on that Queensland job, I couldn't really stack my cricket pedigree up against the likes of Jeff Thompson and Martin Kenton and everybody else that was pretty well applying for the job. They'd all had years and years of either test experience or at least first class playing experience, whereas my resume was very, very skinny, and that's probably building it up as well. So I had to kind of work out, well, if I'm going to take on the job, what am I going to bring to the job? What's going to differentiate me? What's going to excite the interview panel about John Buchanan? And so I just went to my quiet place. I think just before coming on air, you were talking about your long distance triathlete days. And for me, in those days, I used to run a bit, not too far and too fast, but I used to like running. And that was my quiet place. I would head out along the Brisbane River and just think a little bit about, why I do what I do. That would take me right back to my parents, the sort of lessons that they taught me, and some of the things that I liked and I didn't like. And then into school days, same thing, teachers, coaches, and then into my university days, and same thing again, those who were around me, those who influenced me, and looking at all the goods and bads. And then I had the season for Queensland, and that wasn't all that successful. But there are lots of learnings in that, whether it was, there was some success and there was a lot of other things that weren't successful. So I guess that's what I put into my presentation when I went to apply for the job, and that was definitely about my philosophy, my values, and principles, cornerstones, what I believed in, and that's what I presented. And fortunately, I was given the opportunity to do the job. So I guess I always felt then that not having the playing background of other coaches, I saw that as an advantage. There is absolutely no doubt, your profession or anybody's profession, that somebody who has, if you like, been there and done that it's always extremely valuable. And that's what I guess I always tried to do, was to recognize that I didn't have that knowledge or that experience, but it sat in the room, sat in every room that I was there. So my job was really just to bring that out and harness that, rather than try to talk about it, because I just didn't have that experience. But I had other expertise and other knowledge, and I think a broad background, because by the time I took on the Queensland job, we had 5 young children at that stage, and we'd been through a number of shifts around the world doing different things. For me, that brought in a depth of experience that really didn't reside in the dressing rooms, and so I tried to utilise that wherever I could, and as I said, harness the incredible ability that's sat inside the room.
What were the cornerstones, John, that you brought to that process?
First one's always around vision, vision and strategy. But vision, for me, it was always challenging the individual or the leader, and particularly the team, to go somewhere where they'd never been before. With that Queensland team, it was that we were going to dominate domestic cricket for 10 years. So, Queensland had never won a Sheffield Shield at that point in time. And I always felt that was probably a millstone around everybody's neck. And I and we as a group faced that a number of times through that first season, but it was always trying to come back to a bit of the process about how to get a result, not necessarily about the result. And then with the Australian team, it was about, we were going on a journey to Everest together, and Everest was all about playing a different game, changing the way the game was being played. And then when I talk corporately, I'll always encourage, whether it be small teams or large teams, to be world's best, whatever that might mean and whatever that is. But that's kind of the vision. Then sitting alongside the vision is obviously what I term a learning environment, and that is about creating a place where everybody grows. That's, for me, one of the most important things that a coach can do. It is about trying to encourage the individuals in that group to really look at ways and means that they can grow personally, which means that you're always putting them and taking them outside their comfort zone, which also means, therefore, there's going to be lots of mistakes and lots of errors in that journey. But as a leader, and provided that, time and resources is a little bit on your side, then you can give everybody that opportunity to do that, and trust them to do that. And where you need to, you step in and guide and counsel and direct and control and coach and all those sorts of things, and parent, to help them continue to grow. So with the learning environment, then it comes back to the person. It's not about the staff member, it's about the person. So trying to spend as much time as you possibly can to get to know them, so develop that relationship. And obviously you get to have closer relationships with some than others, but there's always a relationship there, and that relationship will be built on trust. And that trust really comes from knowing yourself inside out and delivering on that every day. Again, going along with the whole personal learning environment is the coaches to make yourself redundant. It's to get out of the road. It's to give people that responsibility to have a go, and make decisions. Because again, you and your business, me and my business, or a coach or whatever, the leader, you just cannot afford to be around people all the time. You just cannot afford to micromanage. And if you do, or one, you don't develop trust and you don't develop capability, but two, you burn yourself out, because it is just impossible to do. So really like a parent, try to pull yourself back and give your staff, your people, your athletes an opportunity to grow. Then you sort of couch all that in a plan, and part of that plan for me was never being satisfied. So when you look at a planning framework, then you believe everything can be improved upon. Then, of course, it's about working out, well, if everything can be improved upon, what do we do first? What are the priorities? And then that's driven just by your values, and mine are around family, hard work, and integrity. And so if I can do that every day, every time I'm interacting with somebody or have the opportunity to influence somebody, now or when I was coach, that's how I assess my performance.
That's a great answer. When you went to the national squad and you brought the Everest mentality, or the Everest, I guess, metaphor, why that? And talk to me as well about how you did have the pedigree, you did have the experience and the resume about what you've done in Queensland, but I guess this is a completely different atmosphere and circumstances, and you inherit a team that's starting to do well. It's a team of incredibly diverse personalities. How are you in that in the early days in that environment, and what are you doing? I guess as a new leader or as a leader in a new environment to get the best out of a group that have significant personalities in the room.
Well, firstly, the idea of Everest, I guess, plays into the egos, if you like, of everybody in that room because, they are the national team. They are extremely skilled individuals in their particular workplace. And it was always my view that that team had, in a sense, underperformed. They were a very good team, as you said. They'd won a World Cup in '99 and, they won a couple of test matches or test series away from home. So they were on the right track. Stephen Waugh was a new captain new leader in. And my feedback externally, from Queensland players that had been in the test side or had been in their one-day side and come back to Queensland, was that it still wasn't right in the mix or in the dynamics of the team. And certainly from a results point of view, even though they had got some, I just didn't think they were consistent and were reflective of the abilities that sat in that room. So Everest was a means, one, to challenge their ego, but also a means to tie them together into us trying to achieve something special, something that hadn't been done before. And so, as I said, it was about changing the way the game was played. So I was able to couch that virtually every time we had a series about, well, what does that look like? What does that mean for this particular series? To start with, yes, it was, in a sense, difficult. I did have, fortunately, by that stage, a recognised coaching pedigree from Queensland, so that was a helpful start. I had the support of Stephen Waugh as captain because his mantra was always taking the road less travelled, so he wanted to do things differently. And certainly my approach was different to other coaches that either had been in the Australian mix, and there hadn't been that many. There was only Bobby Simpson and Jeff Marsh before me, or other coaches around the state sides that most of the players had experienced. So I was a bit different to everybody else. So while I had that support, I still had to demonstrate that I could coach at this level, having not, as you said, having not worn a baggy green or necessarily been near that environment. But rather than rushing in, I guess I had my views on maybe what could happen, but I spent the first 9 months. We had 2 test series at home and a tri-series, a one-day competition against India and Pakistan. And then we'd left for New Zealand to do an overseas tour. So I thought by the end of that period of time, I would have a very, very good handle on how the system operated, how the team operated, the dynamics of the team, and certainly better understanding of the individuals in the team. And so that's what I did. I continued in my own way to kind of begin to see this notion of how I would go about things and what was important. And, even from just the dressing room, just posters going up on the wall and messages going up on the wall to the way that we began to analyse the game. I think that kind of resonated with most, but obviously there will be objectors, just like there is in any business. You'll have your allies and you'll have your resistors, and then sitting in the middle is a group that are maybe not sure or a little bit ambivalent and can be influenced either way. So my job was really to try to keep the allies that were there because, as I said, there was Stephen Waugh and Adam Gilchrist started playing his first test. Well, his first test match was my first test match. And then there were the likes of McGrath and the Warren. And, when I started, there was the 2 War boys, Glenn McGrath and Shane Warren. They were really the ones that had been there the longest, and they were the ones that their positions were reasonably strong. At that time, there was there wasn't really, Langer hadn't established himself, Hayden hadn't established himself, Ponting was just on his way back into the side. As I mentioned, Adam Gilchrist was starting. The Lehmans hadn't really come onto the scene. Who else? Gillespie was just coming into the scene. So, it was an interesting period, the first, I reckon, 12 to 18 months, because Warren, who was never one of my greatest supporters in terms of the way I went about things, because, again, his was very old school. And I'm not saying, that in a negative way. It was just that he believed that, you needed to have been there and done that for you to have any real impact upon a group of people. And so, while coaching was important, for him it was about playing experience and bringing some of those insights. So, the first 12 to 18 months, he was very influential. But gradually, as we got that core group more solidified in the team, and I think it's, again, one of the important things for any sort of leader is to try to ensure that you are redundant in that sense. And in other words, that the team becomes a little bit more self-regulating. So if any individuals step outside the boundaries, if you like, of the team, the way that they operate, the way that they play, the way they think, the way they come together, then the team pulls the individuals back into line, rather than it be the coach or the manager or even higher up the hierarchy. So, but that took, at least 18 months to really get that beginning to head in that direction. And by the time I finished, it was an incredible unit of players, not only technically skilled, but in a team skilling sense, very, very good at self-regulation.
In the AFL at the moment, there seems to be a big push for the collective as a group being more important than any individual in the team, and that it would appear that some clubs will invariably say that if anyone steps around that, or if there's an individual that doesn't play the team role, won't have a position in that team. Now in cricket, you got less players, and it's probably more of a one person can actually turn a game, probably more so than in football. But with the likes of the personalities of the Warns or anyone that's come into your dressing room who has a different approach, I guess, let's say, than yourself, how did the team operate with self-regulating that scenario, as against, well, we don't really want to drop the world's greatest leg spinner, for instance, and how that impacted culture generally?
I'll probably debate you about an individual being able to win a cricket game. They can, I think, these days in a T20 game,
But I guess, John, to bring it to business as well, you've got the head salesperson who thinks that they're bigger and better than anyone else in the place, and has that attitude. But reality is, everyone in the office is contributing to that one person's success. But how do you get that person to toe the party line and to row the boat in the right direction so that the whole group can achieve?
Not easy, I don't think, because, again, for those type of players, e.g. like a Shane Warne, I guess I always saw them as conditional team players, that if things were going well for them on field, or, in sales or commissions or winning cases or whatever it might be, then, they're terrific. They're just, in fact, sometimes too terrific. They're just over the top, over enthusiastic about winning and so on. But the flip side of that is, when things aren't going so well, if they're not making the sales, they're not winning the cases, or, their game on field is actually not in its best shape, then they go completely the other way. They become a non-team player. But by that I mean, generally what they will do is point fingers everywhere else. They won't look at themselves. They'll look at other reasons for those things happening, rather than maybe they're a significant contributor to that performance. But I think the biggest thing to remember with with those type of people is that in a high performance environment, the rest of the team want to win. That's what they want to do. That's the game in sport. You either win or you lose. So all players don't want to sit in a losing dressing room. All players want to sit in a winning dressing room. And I think that's the same in business in a sense, that it's a far nicer place to come to work when things are going well. Profits are up, sales are up, good client list. Everybody's in there and enjoying the good times. And so therefore, what happens is the team tends to tolerate some of the things that sit outside what everybody else would normally do. Because that person who's the gun, the Shane Warne or whoever it might be, is the one that puts them in a position either to win or to, just puts up numbers that everybody gets rewarded for. And so they will then begin to tolerate a little bit of, things that sit outside what would normally be expected or the standards that you put in place. Now,
as the leader, as the coach, is that the opportune time to step in and say,
that's right. You took the words out of my mouth. So that's kind of the time where if those little tolerances are allowed or to just keep happening, then suddenly standards slip, culture slips, and ultimately that will lead to performance slide as well. And often that's what happens. And coaches are not immune from it. Coaches are, they're there to win games. Business leaders are there to make sure that their business is profitable and in good shape. And so you are caught up in the day-to-day sort of complexities, I guess, of running a business or running a sports team, and often without taking sufficient personal reflective time, you're just caught up in the weeds. You don't get up on the balcony and you don't look back in and you don't necessarily see the sorts of things that probably you should see as a coach. They're the main things that I think a coach should be doing. It is about culture, and it is about the way that the team operates, and it is about standards, and it is about your own values and principles, and they need to be enforced, reinforced, highlighted, supported, congratulated, whatever needs to do or to be done to make sure that they continue from day to day, because they will change. We're a whole group of individuals and people, and we change from day to day. But in terms of a team and a culture and a system, you want that to be as consistent as possible. So back to your question, the players will tolerate that sort of person while they're winning games, while they're winning cases, while they're winning sales. As soon as that they lose their ability to do that, then it's a big question for everybody, because that person, as I said before, will be then in a place where they're not happy, and it won't be about them. It's about everybody else. And so they can become quite a toxic or a significantly poor influencer of the group, and which can lead then to some toxic outcomes. So at that point, coaches and leaders need to make some clear decisions about whether or not that person should be retained or not, because they're not necessarily going to change their ways. They'll continue to operate the way they are. So my advice, if you like, or my opinion is, as you see that happening, you try to exit that person as quickly as possible before there's too much damage done. So, but while they're winning, everybody gets on. The self-regulation is there. Probably a need for the coach and the leader to monitor it, just to make sure that the standards are not necessarily being eroded. But everybody likes winning. Everybody wants to be in that winning dressing room, and so that's what those people bring.
Hey guys, just popping in quickly to say thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, it would mean a lot if you take a second to follow the show, leave a like or review, and share it with a friend. That support genuinely helps us grow and keep bringing you more great conversations every single week. All right, let's get back into it. You got a business or a team where I guess a key person does have to leave for personal reasons or for form in the sporting arena, and they are otherwise or in business when they decide to move on, and they're an important or at least an influential part of the culture or of the operation of that group. How do you, as the coach or the leader, manage culture through that departure?
Well, I think that's the reality of life, in any aspect of life. We're all sort of moving through. I guess, the cliche, the biggest constant is change these days. And maybe it's always been that way. And so as a coach or a leader in business, you're always looking at, well, who's coming in behind, while we're going along nicely now. What's next? For us, if we are going to chase that Everest, if we're going to continue to, try to change the game, we had players that were in their 30s and physically not as good as they used to be. The game in itself required, just physically, it was quite demanding. And so there was always a change. I must say that probably in the 8 years in that test arena, I think we might have had, I don't know, on a cricket field, there's 11 players, 12 players if you count the 12th man. Over a period of 8 years, I reckon all up we might have had about 25 to 30 in that mix. So there will always be change, due to a whole range of factors. So as a coach, you are, and I suppose when I think about that, we're involved in 2 World Cups. I was involved in 2 World Cups, 2003, 2007, where you take a squad of 15, and in that squad there will generally be probably 10 or so that you would pick straight away, and then there's another 5, and what do we do with those 5? Well, with those 5, you're generally trying to cover every position of the first 10, so that if somebody gets injured, somebody's not performing well, somebody gets sick, there's always going to be something that will take people away from being selected. And so what we always needed to do was to make sure that we tried to cover every position as best we possibly could, so that when that happened, we had somebody to step in and was ready to step in. And that's just the same as we was talking about. It is about just preparing ahead where you want to go, what are the skills and attributes that you need to get there. And then, people become part of that equation. And as you begin to select people to fulfill those roles and those skills to get you in the direction that you want to go.
And with the process of going to Everest, it's well documented that, I think you mentioned earlier, you were an early adopter of I guess computer analysis, and you just seem to be, and Steve Wars obviously, as you said, was keen to lean into doing what others would not necessarily do. How important is that as a general concept, even through now when we're, looking at AI and all the different modalities and opportunities in business? How important is that exercise of trying to look at where we're trying to go at a different angle?
When I started with Queensland, that was 94. Basically, the information sat in the meeting room. So when you had a meeting, there was 12 players and a couple of support staff in the room, and it was their experiences and their knowledge that informed the group as to either the team you're about to play or individuals in the team you're about to play or the conditions you're about to play on. And that's how you formulated a bit of a game plan. And as I said before, that was really important to harness that knowledge and experience, because you just can't replace that. But like all of us, we've got selective memories, or we look at history through our own lens, and so that brings different perspectives on situations. So to make that a lot more accurate, that was the reason behind introducing computers, which hadn't been done before. And I certainly was no computer aficionado at all, but I knew that this piece of technology would help in that process. So what they did was certainly fill in the gaps, make things more precise, make the analysis more precise, but also the feedback more precise, because it was important that the players themselves got more accurate feedback, and they could see that. They could dial up any ball that they wanted to and get some vision on that, So I think what I found from all of that was that, accurate data helps to inform your decision making. And these days, there is just an incredible amount of data going around. And so one of the key roles of the leader or the coach is now to work out what data do I want to utilize, because there is just so much available. And I think, again, therefore, that then comes down to, where are we going? How do we want to play the game? Look at the roles of different players, and then utilize the information to support the decisions you want to make to either prepare for a game, play a game, or review a game.
And then as you progressed with the Australian team, that success continued to the world record consecutive test wins. Is it more challenging as a coach to coach a already successful team to continue their success, or is it against trying to get a group to succeed in the first place?
Yes.
How do you keep the momentum? How do you keep
question.
the athletes or the employees? How do you keep them motivated to stay hungry?
It's a very, very hard job to turn a side around. If they're not winning, there's a whole stack of reasons for that. And the main one, though, is it sits within the individuals themselves, that they basically begin to just look after themselves. They try to secure their own position or secure their own contract. I had some experiences in England with that, and then had some experiences with the IPL, the Indian Premier League, with that. And that one's a really difficult one to address. Takes time and takes patience and takes support of sort of the environment outside the dressing room, because outside the dressing room sits the board, sits a CEO, sits maybe a director of cricket. And what they're doing is fielding lots of questions from stakeholders to say, well, why isn't the team performing? And so then they look, well, who is in control of performance? It's the coach. Right, coach, what are you doing to turn this around? And you go back and say, well, look, we're doing A, B, C, and D, but it's going to take some time. And also, we think that player B and C, maybe we're just going to have a look at them and not sure whether they're the right fit for the team. And so you're not coming back to them with the answer that they want. They want some defined answer. They want a timeline on when things are going to turn around. And they don't want to necessarily hear about having to move people on all the time, because some of those people you're moving on are some of the ones that have been there for a while. And you mentioned AFL there before, and I think it's one of the things that when you look around sport these days, at least international sport, or at least, high profile sport or elite sport, is that if results are not coming, we get rid of the coach. And once we get rid of the coach, that'll turn things around. Well, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but invariably it doesn't turn things around for too long, even if it does. Because again, that person is bringing in their own view on how they should operate and what they need to operate. And it takes time for those dynamics to begin to really filter in over time. I mean, a good example right at the moment for those who maybe follow rugby league is obviously Manly Warringah. And Anthony Seabold, who's a very good coach, had been there previous couple of seasons, without necessarily getting terrific results. But, the beginning of this season started off horrendously. So he was ejected and they brought in Kieran Foran. And it just seemed like a miracle worker. So Foran, I think, won the first 4 games that he was coach of that team. And since that time, they maybe lost 1 or 2 games, but they're still in a much better position than they were. Now, how long that will continue, and he's just been appointed for 3 years now as a full-time coach rather than interim coach. The test of time. Hopefully it'll work. Hopefully he'll be a very successful coach over that period of time. But importantly, they've given him time, and I think that's a really important part of developing a team, developing a culture, developing a system, and developing those relationships between coach and players and support staff.
I guess that's an attempt to try to figure out or diagnose from upper management what the actual problem is to the performance of the success of the team, because like in AFL, Carlton and Essendon have had significantly bad runs, and they've both ejected their respective coaches. And Carlton has since won every game they've played, so they're, I think, 4 on the trot now, and Essendon still haven't won one. So it could be that the relationship between the players and the coach was the issue, or that the players now are fighting for their role, they're fighting for their job, and
look, there's a lot more to it. I mean, because teams are not winning, therefore you're less likely to want to go to that club for a start. So very hard to attract maybe young talent as well as old talent to go to those clubs. When they run onto the field or when they're preparing through the week, even though they're going to talk all the right things, do they actually feel it? Do they actually understand it about winning? Because they haven't been in that position too often of late. So there's a real cloud. When I mentioned that Queensland, my time with Queensland, and there was a classic game, which was our last game before a Sheffield Shield final, and there was 4 teams in the running at that stage, and we were playing Tasmania, and the other teams, 2 of them were playing. WA was playing Victoria, and South Australia was the other team, and they were playing New South Wales. So we knew that the Victoria WA game, there'd be 6 points there because they're both in the running, so they're going to go for a win. And South Australia, had played very well. So at the end of day 1, South Australia were in a really good position. Maybe Victoria was in a good position in Melbourne, and we'd been bowled out by Tassie for a low score, and they started batting, and we're in a reasonably strong position. And so the players slumped off the field. They just sort of skulked off the field. They were just head down, shoulders rounded, dragged themselves into the dressing room. And all the way through the season, we talked just about the process, not about the winning, not about the Holy Grail, just about understanding how we play our best cricket, and that's all we have to deal with. We just got to try and do that every session, every day, every match. But here it was, we were that close to not only getting into the Shield final, but hosting the Shield final, that they'd been totally distracted by what I call the ghosts of the past. Everything that had happened for 69 years was suddenly inside that dressing room. Close again, but no cigar. That was where I had to go in and sort of put on a different mask and try to exercise what was going on in there. And so that was to my point about when teams are not winning, there is a mentality to that, even though it's probably spoken, not spoken, and it's trying to be upbeat. It resides within each player. It resides within the walls of the dressing room, and so those sort of things have to be addressed, and try to bring them out, which could be pretty robust sort of conversations. but try to bring them out so that that's put to one side, and then they can go about playing the game just for the game, not for everything else around it. But to the other point about teams that are going well, how to keep them up. Well, that was always my view that that Australian team was a good team, but it wasn't a great team, and it continued right through to the end when I finished with the World Cup in 2007, and I remember a journal asking a question about now that you're finished, did you ever coach the perfect game? Because obviously I think anyway, the most coaches would love to coach what they believe is a perfect game. And by perfect, I mean, we've laid out our match plan and we just followed that to the letter, and it just flowed the way we thought it would, and we got the result that we wanted. And so my response was that we got close, but I don't think we ever played the perfect game. We got close but didn't play it. But I said what we did have was the perfect team. And by that I meant that all players, most of the time, wanted to find ways and means of improving themselves. And so when you talk about how do you motivate players, well, I can't motivate a player, but I can create an environment that's challenging and stimulating, and give them that picture about where we're going, and we're going to do things that other people can't do. And so to do that, therefore, we need to change certain skills. Again, one of the examples was in that lead up, or in my last 20 months, I coined a phrase, target 400. And that was, again, a reinvention of, or a recrafting of the notion of Everest, again, to do something that no other team had ever done. And that was to score 400 in a one-day game. And, it wasn't said lightly. I certainly believe we had the skill in the room to do that, but we should necessarily be aiming for something like that rather than just rolling from one tournament to the next tournament and then getting ready for a World Cup, a year later. So it was about target 400, and that was the challenge to the players. Well, how are we going to go about doing that? And it was, just briefly, it was a very interesting period of time. The players wanted to do it. Yeah, we all want to be the first to do it. Terrific. Go away, come back.
This is before T20 as well, coach? Mind you.
Yeah, we're going to do that. We're scoring 340 or 350 now. How else are we going to do that? So coming back to your point about data, I said, right, well, let's have a look at the numbers. And so I pulled out all our big scoring games and showed them on average we would score off, say, 150 balls. And I said, mate, or team, we've got another 150 balls here that we're not using. So why don't we start using some of those? That'll push. Yeah, all right, let's go away and do that. And then they come back and say, but we're using all our skills at the moment. I said, oh, yeah, well, I don't think so. Let's go and look at some of the basics. And so just pulled up vision on running between wickets and showed them how badly most of them ran between wickets. I said, if we can improve that, then that'll give us the opportunity to either extend the runs that we're scoring at the moment, or we might be able to use a few more of the balls. And then eventually some of the players began to, like Ricky Ponting, had a beautiful cover drive. He began to work out, well, if I sort of drop my back leg a little bit, I can now get this ball over cover rather than straight to cover. So we worked on that, and then as history shows, we got there just about 3.5 hours before the second team who got to 400 as well.
It was get to 400. It wasn't to win.
No, we forgot about the second
half. But that, I guess, is a relevant point, right? Because you almost manifest, or you achieve what you set out. You can think to the high performers out there, we've all got this ability to set a big goal, but and achieve that goal. But what happens next is an important place where if you're not ready for that, to that point, to say, let's go get 400, and we didn't set and win the match.
Yeah.
And I think also for business, you set a goal and it's a little bit more subjective, a little bit more grey in terms of you can't lose, you don't win business, you don't lose business. But if you have a goal, and what level, doesn't matter what level management or ownership you're at, but you have a goal and you achieve that goal, there is this element of like, well, what now? What do we do
Yeah.
next? How do you go about that, John, in terms of, particularly even now with the businesses that you are working with, the leadership that you're working with in the different groups? How do you go about going, well, we've achieved, it's almost as if it would be easy if it was like, well, we're going to go achieve, let's go get a Ferrari. And you go, okay, but then that becomes very tangible, similar to 400, similar to a number on a balance sheet for the financial year. But it's like, well, then how do we get inspired to, or what do we do in that period of time afterwards once we've achieved it to reset the next Everest?
Well, it's important to realize that they're just outcomes, their results, their outcomes, but they're outcomes of doing stuff to get there in the first place. So one of the starting points is always to go back into, and from an individual's perspective, but it still relates to the team. I break it down into technical skills, physical, mental, and tactical skills. So every role, doesn't matter what it is, has got a set of technical skills. Every role's got a set of physical skills. Even if you're an office worker, you still got to actually turn up every day, or even if you work from home, you still got to work from home every day. So how do I actually get there and I'm ready to go, and, I've got life and energy and thinking power and through the course of the day. And that all relates to either, rest, recovery, nutrition, physical exercise, all those sorts of things. So every role's got physical demands. Your mental skills, which is all about, what are my routines to be in the moment, so to speak, to be in the zone, like as we are now. We're talking, and I think, we're in the conversation. So we've kind of switched into the conversation. We haven't switched off. We're switched into the conversation, albeit that what's going through your mind is you're in the conversation at some point, and then your mind's going to wander because you're going to think, oh, I must ask this question. So you kind of dive out, and then you'll come back in. But again, same for everybody, that, how do I switch on and switch off? Because you just can't concentrate all day. And then your tactical skills are that, well, if I've got a clear mind, and that's the mental routine, clear my mind so that I can either listen or I can draw on my experience and my knowledge, which sits up in the files up top. Draw on that so that I can make the right call for this particular moment. So that's kind of the decision-making process, and then you rely on your technical and physical to execute. And then the fifth set of skills is my team skills. So if I can do that, if I can understand how I do that really well, now how do I necessarily bring that to the team? How do I help the team with those skills? How do I share some of my successes? How do I support somebody that, going back to self-regulation, how do I now go and talk to somebody else who might need some help? And so, if we can get those things going well, then it means that individuals will always be challenged, provided that the coach or the leader, ensures that that's still the case, because all of those skills can be improved. There's absolutely no doubt all of those skills can be improved. And then the second part is, well, understanding that, well, the coach or the leader can, set some, like a target 400 or, a new Everest or whatever it might be. But as the team becomes far more mature, you want their buy-in. You want them to actually begin to decide what that might look like, or decide how to even just word that so that there is ownership of that at the same stage. So one, it's about the individual and in getting them to understand that there's so much room for improvement in what they do currently, even if they believe they're at their best. And then two, well, individuals contribute to a team success. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Where are we going? And we need to own that.
I love that answer. John, you've spoken to a lot of on a lot of podcasts and deal with, now in that consulting space of helping leaders and leadership groups. What is something that people wouldn't know about that time, let's say as you as the national coach?
The way that I coach, as I said, is to make myself redundant. So I guess I always play, in inverted commas, a back office role. and I wasn't one to be seeking the front row or the limelight in any way. That was really to be owned by the players and the team, and my job was to try to ensure that we were as successful as we could be for as long a period of time as we were together. And so I'd always say I'd put my ego in my back pocket, so that's what I do. I'd always try to ensure that, I wasn't the story. The story was about the players and about our successes. So in doing that, I guess I became a little bit less visible as a coach. And in a cricket sense, coaches are less visible. They're not visible like short duration sports like AFL or rugby league or soccer or netball or basketball, whatever it is, because the coaches are very actively involved in the decisions that occur on field or in game. Whereas, in cricket, it's a long duration game and it stops. It stops after every ball, it stops after every over, stops for a drinks break. So in those periods, that's where the captain on field is really making decisions, that they have that luxury and opportunity to do that. And a coach, sits well removed from that. The coach's opportunity in cricket is generally at the, lunch breaks or the tea breaks. Now, T20, the new format, is a little less like that because there is active intervention by coaches who walk on the field at, the various stoppages that they have these days and can provide some input that way. But overall, I think a cricket coach, the game is longer, it takes time, there are stoppages, and it can go for days. So that there are times where the coach gets to interact with the game, but less visible to a public than a short duration sport.
On reflection, how do you reflect on that whole period of your life?
Oh, look, I'm very privileged, very lucky in the first place to be given an opportunity to coach Queensland, and very lucky again to not only coach Queensland, but to have success with them. To be part of a first Sheffield Shield win was an incredible experience. And then again, the privilege came to be, coach of that Australian cricket team, as a young boy growing up on the Gold Coast in the 50s and 60s. I mean, that was my dream. I was going to wear the baggy green and nothing short of it. And unfortunately, ambition goes one direction, ability goes another. So it was never going to happen. So to be coach of a team that you dreamed that you could play for and to represent your country, I mean, that's an amazing privilege and something that always be very, very grateful for.
Well, I'm grateful for your time, John. And you're an absolute huge source of experience and information, and we'll put details on the notes in terms of how businesses and individuals can get in contact with you and assist their leadership skills and frameworks as well. So before you go, our fast 5 questions for you, as it is with every guest. What does success mean to you now, John?
Family, seeing our children grow up and be happy and healthy and have their own children and then grandchildren doing the same.
What does happiness mean to you?
So much about the family and looking at their lives and where they're going.
Almost like it's you're taking the back seat as you were as a coach, I guess, and making sure the team operates well. But now it's the family as against an Australian cricket team. What does your normal morning routine look like?
It depends whether it's summer or winter. It's easier to get out of bed early in the morning in summer and harder in the colder months. But normally it's up, and we have the celery juice. Get to kick off the day.
Yep.
Bit of coffee, and then a bit of exercise before the day takes hold.
Love that. If there was one piece of advice that you could give the world from all of your experiences into one, what would it be, John?
It's about taking the time to build relationships.
Love that. Someone that you know who you would think would be a great guest for our show?
Anybody, honestly. We run a business and sports connection network now with a couple other guys. We meet once a month with a whole range of businesses and sports people in the room, and have business people learn from the locker room and vice versa. And the more I go to those things, the more I realise everybody has got an incredible story. Everybody, doesn't matter who they are. It's just that they don't believe they have, and nobody ever asks them, So I just think you don't even have to walk out of your office. You could ask somebody in your office to go through some of the questions that you've been asking here today, and everybody's story will be different, will be enlightening, and I think just a really good insight into life. I think we get a bit hung up on the celebrity status, and I'm not suggesting for one moment you are. It's about ordinary people do extraordinary things, but they don't realise it.
Yeah, no truer words ever spoken, John. And that's the big reason why we started this show 150 or 160 episodes ago, because the platform you're certainly have been in the limelight in your past, but been so many guests that we've had that haven't, but have incredibly inspiring and motivating stories and journeys themselves. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you and your time today, mate. And all the best going forward with the family. And thanks again.
Thanks very much, Richard. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That was another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. Next time you're watching the cricket, turn to the person next to you, tell them all about the show. It really means a lot. A huge thank you to John for sharing his incredible experiences and insights on leadership, culture, and sustained success. If today's conversation inspired you, please subscribe, leave a comment, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. It really does help. Until next time, peace.